years of this International Women's Day. Can you give us an appraisal, specifically looking at Uganda, but bringing it as well to the global scale? How far has this campaign gone in emancipating the woman?
Well, the struggle for women's rights has been going on for a very long time. Globally, women have been making gains inch by inch. You could say that the 21st century or the 20th century was the century for women. Many, many gains were made. At the beginning of the 20th century, women were not even allowed to vote, almost all over the world. By the end of the century, a few women had broken through and were presidents. Many, many rights were gained, but then when you take stock, and the reason we have International Women's Day, that is a day to reflect. I often hear people say they celebrate, but it's really a day for reflection, to take stock and see how equal the world has become, or whether indeed it is becoming more equal between men and women or not. So looking at Uganda, modern day Uganda, our mothers were struggling around the time of the colonial period. They participated in the struggle for independence. There are women who are still alive today, fortunately, who were part of those struggles. Women like the Honorable Joyce Mpanga, the Honorable Rhoda Kalema. These are women who were there in colonial times and active in the public domain. There were women at independence. There were our mothers who were struggling for girls' education. Many of us are educated because our mothers insisted on their girls going to school at a time when boys had preferential treatment for schooling. So those were struggles of those days. There were struggles to keep girls in school and not to send them off for early marriage, to end arranged marriages in certain communities. So it's been a long struggle, and I would say today that while there's been a lot of progress in our country, that there are still many challenges that women face. Amongst them is the problem of violence against women. This is manifested in many ways, but the biggest manifestation of violence against women here in this country, I would say, is intimate partner violence. Women are treated like children. Corporal punishment is still common, that women are beaten as a way to discipline them by spouses, by even male relatives. This kind of abuse still happens. Girl children suffer a lot of abuse. So violence is still a big problem in our community, and violence against women. But even above that, the problem of biting poverty. What poverty does to women is different from what it does to men in many cases. There are gender dimensions to poverty, and here in Uganda you can see that a poor family puts more pressure on a woman to provide. A poor woman has less voice in the division of scarcer resources. So poverty bites women harder than it bites men, and getting out of poverty is harder for women than for men, for reasons that my colleagues Patricia and Sylvia advanced. So poverty, violence, HIV/AIDS has really proven to highlight very specific vulnerabilities for young women particularly. So there are still many challenges that make men and women more and more unequal, and we have to deal with them.
All right, can we look at the Uganda case? Do you see the Uganda movement making good progress? How we were supposed to be? Of course, knowing even globally, it's not a very old movement. In the US, it was only until the 1950s that we saw major liberties opened up.
You know, I don't like talking about movement, because when you talk about movement, you kind of politicize the issues. I like to think about women. Are women making gains generally, without talking about it? When you talk about the movement, you talk about the women in the leadership of the movement. If you talk about women in this country, inequality has many axes. We see that there is an axis of rural-urban, where rural are less privileged than urban in terms of access to services, for example. We have poverty that is not evenly distributed across the country. You have some regions that are falling back and regions that are doing better. You have the north and the east suffering more poverty than the west and the center. So these axes of poverty also combine with the axis of gender, men and women. So you have to consider that a woman from northern Uganda in a rural area is probably worse hit than any other woman, especially also if she happens to be a widow coming from war. You see, all those axes combine to make women particularly vulnerable.
Right.
So looking at that context, I would say for Uganda it's important to reconstruct the north so that men and women recover those lost years of war, 20 years or more of war. That will improve the lives of the most impoverished women in this country. I would say that there's need to pump a lot of services and resources into restoring the economy in the east, particularly. There's biting poverty that will uplift many women in that region. And I would say there's a need to do a recovery of agriculture nationally, because even here in Buganda, agriculture has collapsed more or less, and that is what is the livelihood of most women.
Right.
So I would say that you have to look at the various axes rather than just look at the movement and where the movement is going.
All right, well, that's a new dimension. It seems to be easier to delineate it as a movement from the way we've been looking at it. But thank you very much for that perspective. Patricia, you spoke about education earlier. How can this be enhanced? We have the 1.5, the affirmative action at the university. We have UPE, USE now going to A-level. What can be done to get the children, the girl child, stay in school longer?
I think there are many issues that civil society has been talking about over the years that need to be worked on in order to ensure that girls stay in school. Because some of the things that come through are issues of early marriages. And of course, once you talk about early marriages, that means you not only need to talk to the girls, you also need to talk to their parents, to the communities, in order for this issue to be dealt with. There's the whole issue of sanitary facilities. In many instances, we find places where both the girls and the boys go to the same toilets. And for example, when a girl is in her menstrual period, she will probably prefer to stay at home rather than go to school. Right. So those are some of the issues that need to be dealt with in order for the girl to remain in school. There are some other broader issues that have been coming through, like provision of lunch, for example, because we know although there is UPE, there's no provision for lunch. And so people have been asking questions, so how do you expect a child to really study if they're not going to have any food at all? There's the whole issue of the teacher-pupil ratio, and also the fact that many schools do not have the senior woman teacher or a matron who the girls can go to when they have specific problems that they would like a woman to address. So those are some of the issues that need to be dealt with if the girls are to be kept in school.
Okay, rather than look at it from the generic perspective, let's look at it specifically from the girl-child point of view. When you have the 1.5, maybe that's a little bit too high. Let's talk about the UPE and USE. The children probably have an incentive to stay in class longer. It's free, they don't have to pay. So they don't really have to be pushed to get married after all.
But I've also talked about the sanitation facilities, which are unavailable in some of the schools. We have talked about the whole issue of child marriages, early childhood marriages. If, as Winnie said, a family is poor, and if a man comes along and is willing to pay bride price, many families are willing to let their girls go and get that income into their family. So those are some of the reasons that the girl will drop out of school sometimes. So basically, you make a statement, you're saying that in spite of the existence of this UPE free education at the primary and secondary levels, it's possible and it's happening that parents pull their children out of school to get married so they can have some do. How can this be? Yes?
Let me add to what Patricia is saying and go back to my theme of looking at gender inequality as one axis and combining it with others rather than taking it alone. Patricia is right that girls drop out of school for reasons like early marriage, for reasons like dealing with puberty and needing privacy that's not allowed. Those facts are right. But then you take a case like, you go to a district like here in Kampala.
Yes.
And you have one school that has 100 first grade students at P7 level.
Yes.
And you go to a district like Yumbe, where the entire district had only 30 first grades. 30, entire district.
The district, not just a school.
Not just one school.
Yeah.
Everybody else failed. So in this context of Yumbe, the girl child, the boy child, doesn't have a future beyond that level where she or he is a little half-baked child who has failed P7.
Right.
So if you are looking at inequality, you have to combine the axes of inequality and understand that you need to address it together. Children in northern Uganda will drop out of school for those reasons, but will also drop out for other reasons related to poverty, to education not being able to provide the basics that make education relevant and meaningful and useful. They will drop out because they haven't got even the basics to go to school, both boys and girls. So we have to look at how do you make the poorest communities able to take their kids to school and keep them there, and then after that, how do we make sure that the girl doesn't drop out because of the particular issues of being a girl. So I'm trying to emphasize that we have so much inequality. We must not dig into only one way of being unequal. Take the 1.5.
Yes.
Take the 1.5 which we have at Makerere. Who does it benefit? Think about it. This 1.5, or
well, people have said it benefits the rich girls.
Absolutely. And if you take also the government sponsorship at the university, same thing.
People are already
it goes to my daughter. If I have a daughter at SC,